Have you ever wondered why some people grow lonelier as they get older, while others remain surrounded by love, support, and genuine connection? It's rarely just about wrinkles, moving slower, or the physical changes that come with age. The truth is, over the years, all of us quietly pick up certain habits without even realizing it. Small, sneaky patterns that seem harmless at first, but gradually push people away, damage relationships, and make life feel harder than it needs to be. And the frightening thing is that most of us don't even recognize we're doing these things until loneliness has already settled in. But here's the encouraging part. You can change these habits, and this video will show you exactly how. We're going to dive straight into the uncomfortable, often ignored behaviors that tend to creep into your life as you age. The ones that slowly steal your joy, weaken your emotional health, and quietly break the closeness you once had with the people who matter most. Along the way, you'll meet Sarah, a 71-year-old retired librarian, whose story reveals just how easily these habits can take over, and how she eventually turned everything around. So why should you watch until the very end? Because we're uncovering 9 surprising traps that may already be affecting you or someone you care about right now. And we're pairing them with simple, practical. I'll tell you this up front. Number 7 is the one most people overlook until it's already cost them dearly. By the time we finish, you'll walk away with one clear challenge, a single, small action that could start to shift your life in a completely new direction, beginning today. So stay with me, because you're about to learn how to recognize these habits before they take over, how to rebuild connections you thought were gone, and how to age with purpose instead of regret. If you've ever felt stuck, disconnected, or simply wondered what might be quietly holding you back, then this video is for you. And if you find value in this message, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Because the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to make real change. Now, let's get started. Let me tell you a little more about Sarah, because her story might sound familiar to many of us. Sarah, for most of her life, she was full of life herself. Warm, social, always surrounded by people who enjoyed being around her. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, who sent thank you cards, who'd show up at your door with a smile and a plate of cookies just because. She loved her family, kept up with her neighbors, and had friends she'd known for decades. There was always laughter in her house, always someone dropping by for a chat. But as the years went by, things started to change. Not in any sudden, dramatic way. Just slowly, quietly. Like time wearing down a stone. Aging brought little surprises she hadn't expected. Her body felt different, her patience a bit thinner, her world a little smaller. The routines that once gave her comfort began to feel repetitive, and little by little, she started turning inward. She stayed home more often, talked less, and told herself she just didn't have the energy today. The phone would ring, and she'd think, "I'll call back later." Invitations came, and she'd say, "Maybe next time." But next time didn't always come. That's the thing about loneliness. It rarely arrives with a bang. It sneaks in softly, through the smallest cracks of everyday life. A habit here, a missed conversation there. A quiet evening that turns into 2, then 3. Before you know it, months have passed, and the warmth that used to fill your days feels a little dimmer. The people you love are still there, but somehow, there's a distance you can't quite name. And it's easy to think loneliness just happens, but the truth is, it builds slowly. One choice, one habit, one unspoken moment at a time. By the time we finally feel it, the roots have already settled deep. But the good news is, it's never too late to turn things around. That's what Sarah discovered. Once she began to notice what was really happening, the little pattern she'd fallen into, she started to make small changes. Not big, dramatic gestures, just gentle, steady steps that slowly brought light and connection back into her life. So, let's take a closer look at what those patterns were. Here are the habits that quietly crept into Sarah's life, and the small, everyday shifts that helped her find her way back to warmth, connection, and herself. So let's talk about the first habit that crept into Sarah's life, becoming increasingly negative or critical. It didn't happen overnight. Sarah had always thought of herself as someone who simply told it like it is. She wasn't trying to be negative, just honest. But as the years went by, she found herself sighing more often, grumbling a little louder, and carrying a kind of heaviness into her conversations that she never used to have. It started with small things, a complaint about her aching joints in the morning, a remark about how the news was always so depressing, or how people just don't have manners anymore. None of it seemed like a big deal at the time, but little by little, those tiny frustrations began to shape the way she spoke, and soon they were shaping the way others felt around her too. Friends who once loved to chat over coffee started to call less often. Her daughter stopped sharing as many stories from work, because every conversation somehow turned into a warning or a criticism. Even her grandchildren, who used to run into her arms with excitement, began to grow quiet around her. The visits got shorter, the laughter faded, and she didn't understand why. The truth is, negativity, even when it feels justified, slowly drains the warmth from our presence. People love honesty, yes, but no one wants to leave a conversation feeling worse than when they came. And Sarah, like many of us, didn't see it happening. She thought she was just expressing herself, but over time, she had unknowingly turned her words into walls. It's an easy trap to fall into. Life changes, our patience wears thin, the aches and worries pile up, and before we realize it, we're leading every conversation with something that's wrong instead of something that's right. We think we're connecting through shared frustrations, but what we're really doing is pushing connection away. For Sarah, the wake-up moment came one afternoon when her granddaughter looked at her and said softly, "Grandma, you sound upset a lot." It wasn't said with judgment, just innocence. But it hit her hard. That night, sitting alone in her quiet kitchen, she realized she didn't want to be remembered as someone who always found the bad in things. She wanted to be someone whose presence felt light again, comforting, not heavy. So, she made a small promise to herself. Every morning, before she let a single complaint out, she'd try to name one thing she was thankful for. Something simple, real, close at hand. The coffee smells nice. The sun looks good today. I feel okay this morning. It felt silly at first, but it began to shift something inside her. And with time, that small practice of gratitude softened her tone, brightened her spirit, and changed the way people responded to her. The conversations became warmer. People stayed a little longer. The house didn't feel so quiet anymore. Sarah learned something that day, something all of us eventually have to learn. Negativity might feel honest, but it doesn't always serve us. A little gratitude, even when life feels heavy, can bring light back into the room. And more often than not, that's exactly what helps the people we love feel close again. The second habit that quietly crept in, letting personal care fade. Sarah used to take such pride in how she presented herself. She didn't do it out of vanity or to impress anyone. It was simply part of who she was. She loved picking out her clothes for the day, brushing her hair until it framed her face just right, putting on a touch of perfume before she went out. Those small rituals gave her a sense of joy, a feeling that she was still part of the world, active, alive, and visible. But over time, that began to change. It didn't happen suddenly. It started with one skipped haircut, a day where she stayed in her house clothes because she was just going to be home anyway. Then one day turned into another, and before long, she couldn't remember the last time she wore her favorite blouse or her bright scarf that always made her smile. She started telling herself, "What's the point? I'm not going anywhere. No one's coming by." And that's the thing. She truly believed it didn't matter anymore. But little by little, she began to notice something. When she stopped caring about how she looked, she also stopped feeling like herself. It wasn't about beauty. It was about identity. The reflection in the mirror no longer looked like the woman she remembered. The woman who used to laugh easily, who carried herself with quiet confidence, who walked with purpose. What Sarah didn't realize at first is that the way we care for ourselves sends a message, not to others, but to our own hearts. When you take a moment to comb your hair, put on something that makes you feel good, or even spritz your favorite scent, you're reminding yourself, I still matter. It's not about chasing youth or keeping up appearances. It's about dignity, about showing up for yourself the same way you once showed up for others. The turning point came one morning when her daughter stopped by unexpectedly. Sarah caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the tired face looking back. There was no sparkle, no color, no trace of the woman she'd always been. That afternoon, she decided to do something simple. She brushed her hair, changed into her favorite sweater, and dabbed on a little lipstick she hadn't touched in years. When she looked at herself again, she felt something shift inside. It wasn't just the reflection that looked different, it was her spirit. The next time she went out to the grocery store, something interesting happened. People smiled at her again. A neighbor she hadn't seen in months stopped to chat. It wasn't the clothes or the makeup that drew them in. It was the energy she carried. Because when you feel good, people can feel it too. Sarah realized that taking care of herself wasn't a luxury. It was a form of self-respect, a quiet way of saying, I still deserve to feel good in my own skin. Those small acts, clean clothes, a brushed head of hair, a bit of color on the face, became her way of keeping her connection with the world alive. And slowly, the light that had faded started to return. She smiled more, she stood taller, and she began to notice that the woman she thought she'd lost was still there all along, just waiting for her to remember who she was. The third habit that crept into Sarah's life, becoming resistant to change. Sarah had always been proud of knowing what she liked and how she liked things done. She was steady, dependable, and in her own quiet way. She took comfort in the familiar. For most of her life, that steadiness had served her well. But as the world around her kept changing faster and faster, that same steadiness slowly turned into stubbornness. When her children started sending photos and updates through group chats, she waved it off. I don't need all that nonsense, she said. If they want to talk to me, they can pick up the phone. It sounded reasonable enough, after all. That's how she'd kept in touch for decades. But over time, those phone calls became fewer. Family news, shared jokes, and even birthday plans started happening in those little digital spaces she refused to enter. She wasn't being left out on purpose. She had quietly stepped aside without realizing it. Weeks turned into months, and she started hearing about things after they'd already happened. A grandchild's school play, a family dinner, a new baby picture. She would say, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" And her daughter would gently reply, "Mom, we sent it in the group chat." That was when it sank in. By refusing to learn something new, she had built a wall between herself and the people she loved most. It wasn't that she couldn't learn, she simply didn't want to. Change felt uncomfortable. The phone in her hand seemed confusing, the buttons too small, the steps too complicated. And that's something many of us understand. It's not just about technology. It's about feeling out of place in a world that's always updating, always moving forward. Sometimes, saying I don't need that feels easier than admitting I'm a little afraid of trying. But the truth Sarah discovered is that staying open to change isn't about keeping up. It's about staying connected. When we stop learning, we quietly start shrinking our world. And the smaller it becomes, the lonelier it feels. Her turning point came when her granddaughter sat beside her one afternoon and said, "Grandma, can I show you something?" Sarah almost said no. But this time, she hesitated. She saw the hope in that little girl's eyes and decided to give it a try. In just a few minutes, her granddaughter showed her how to send a text and how to see pictures in the family chat. It wasn't as hard as she thought. In fact, it made her smile. The next morning, she woke up to 3 messages. A good morning, Mom, from her daughter. A funny picture from her son, and the little heart emoji from her granddaughter. For the first time in a long time, she felt included again. From that moment on, Sarah promised herself she would start saying, "I'll try," instead of, "I don't need that." It wasn't about mastering technology or chasing trends. It was about staying teachable, keeping her heart open, and letting curiosity lead the way. That one small yes brought more connection than she ever expected. She realized that change didn't have to be the enemy of comfort. It could be the bridge back to closeness. And as she put it later, with a gentle smile, the world didn't leave me behind. I just needed to take one step toward it. The fourth habit that slowly found its way into Sarah's life, holding on to clutter and old possessions. There comes a time when the things we've carried with us, the photos, the letters, the keepsakes tucked away in drawers, start to tell the story of a life well lived. They remind us of love, of laughter, of moments we never want to lose. And for many of us, those things become anchors, pieces of our past that feel too precious to part with. That's exactly how it was for Sarah. Every room in her house held a bit of her history, birthday cards her children had made, the tea set her mother once cherished, travel brochures from trips she never quite took. Each object seemed harmless on its own, but over the years, those little pieces of memory began to add up. Shelves filled, corners disappeared. Soon, her once cozy home began to feel heavy, crowded, almost tired, as though the space itself was holding its breath. At first, she brushed it off. "It's just things," she'd say. "I know where everything is." But deep down, she felt the difference. It wasn't just the clutter on the tables. It was the clutter in her mind. Cleaning felt overwhelming. Having guests over felt like too much effort. So, she stopped inviting people. She told herself she just liked her solitude. But really, she was slowly retreating into it. The truth is, clutter doesn't just fill our homes. It fills our hearts with the weight of yesterday. We tell ourselves we're keeping memories alive, but sometimes what we're really doing is holding on so tightly to the past that we leave no room for the present to breathe. Sarah's wake-up call came one quiet afternoon when her daughter stopped by and gently said, "Mom, maybe it's time to let go of a few things." The words stung. "These are my memories," she replied. "I'm not throwing my life away." Her daughter smiled softly and said, "You're not throwing your life away, Mom. You're just making space for the life you still have." That night, Sarah stood in her living room and really looked around. For the first time, she didn't just see her belongings. She saw how tired the house felt. So she took a deep breath and decided to begin, not with the whole room, but with one drawer, one small drawer, then one box, then one more. It wasn't easy. Every item had a story. But as she went through them, she realized something beautiful. The stories didn't live in the things. They lived in her. Some items she gave to her children, so the memories could live on with them. Some she donated, hoping they'd bring comfort to someone else. A few she kept, the ones that still brought her joy. And with every bag she carried out, she felt lighter, not just in her hands, but in her heart. A few weeks later, her home felt different. There was more light coming through the windows, more air in the rooms, more peace in the quiet moments. Friends started visiting again. The laughter returned. And one morning, sitting in her favorite chair by the window, Sarah whispered to herself, "This feels like home again." She learned something many of us come to realize sooner or later. Letting go doesn't mean losing what matters. It means honoring the past without letting it hold you prisoner. Sometimes, freedom doesn't come from keeping everything close. It comes from finally making space for what's next. The fifth habit that crept in without notice, losing patience too quickly. There was a time when Sarah thought of herself as an easygoing person, calm, understanding, always willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. But as the years went by, her patience began to wear thinner. Little things started to bother her more than they used to. The noise in the grocery store, the long line at the pharmacy, the way the cashier fumbled with the change. Things that once wouldn't have mattered now set off a spark of irritation she couldn't quite control. One afternoon, she was standing in line at the store, waiting to check out. The young cashier looked nervous, new on the job, still learning. He was moving slower than she thought he should. She could feel her frustration building. "Why can't he move faster?" she muttered under her breath. When he dropped a few coins, she snapped before she could stop herself. "Come on, can't you hurry up?" The words hung there, sharp and heavy. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he tried to finish the transaction. In that moment, Sarah saw the look on his face, embarrassed, anxious, and her heart sank. He wasn't being careless. He was just trying his best. The silence that followed felt longer than the whole line had taken. Walking back to her car, she couldn't shake that image, the hurt in his eyes. She sat there for a long time, realizing she had become someone she never meant to be. The truth hit hard. Impatience doesn't just make life harder for others, it poisons our own peace too. As we get older, it's easy to lose patience. Our bodies slow down, our energy fades, and the world seems to move faster and louder than we can keep up with. But patience, real patience, isn't about moving at someone else's speed. It's about grace. It's choosing calm when frustration feels easier. It's remembering that everyone, including us, is doing the best they can with what they have. The next time Sarah went to that same grocery store, she saw the same young cashier again. This time, she smiled. "You're doing great," she told him softly. The boy looked up, surprised, and smiled back. And in that small exchange, something inside her softened. She realized patience isn't weakness, it's strength. It's a kind of emotional grace that keeps us grounded when the world feels too fast or too loud. It doesn't mean pretending things don't bother us. It means taking a breath before we respond, giving ourselves a moment to choose kindness over irritation. Now, whenever she feels that spark of frustration rising, whether it's with a slow driver, a busy line, or her own forgetfulness, she pauses. One deep breath, one quiet reminder. Take it easy. Be gentle. There's no need to rush. It's a small practice, but it changes everything. Because the truth is, life's too short to spend it angry at the little things. The more patience we give, the more peace we find, not just with others, but inside ourselves. The sixth habit that crept in quietly: talking too much. Listening too little. As we get older, we have a lot of stories to tell. Decades of lessons, experiences, and wisdom we've earned the hard way. And for many of us, that becomes our way of connecting by sharing what we know. But sometimes, without even realizing it, that good intention starts to take up too much space in a conversation. That's what happened with Sarah. She loved to talk, especially with her daughter. Every call started with the best of intentions: catching up, sharing updates, checking in. But somehow, the conversations always ended up circling back to Sarah's stories, her advice, her opinions. She didn't mean to dominate the talk. She just wanted to connect. Yet somewhere along the way, she stopped noticing that her daughter wasn't saying much anymore. One afternoon, her daughter finally said it, gently but honestly. "Mom, I love talking to you, but sometimes it feels like you don't really hear me." Those words landed like a small stone in Sarah's chest. She hadn't realized how one-sided their talks had become. For her, it felt like she was sharing love through her words. For her daughter, it felt like there was no space left to breathe. That's the thing. We all want to be heard. It's one of the deepest forms of love there is. When someone truly listens to you, not to fix you, not to correct you, but just to be present. It makes you feel seen. And when that doesn't happen, even the closest relationships can start to feel distant. Sarah spent a long evening thinking about that conversation. She realized that, somewhere along the way, she had confused talking with connecting. She thought giving advice was the same as showing care. But what her daughter really needed wasn't another story or solution. She just needed her mother's quiet attention. So Sarah decided to try something new. The next time her daughter called, she made a promise to herself. Just listen. She asked questions, open ones. Not yes or no questions, but the kind that invited her daughter to share more. She listened without interrupting, without jumping in to relate everything back to her own experience. It wasn't easy at first. There were moments when she had to bite her tongue, moments when she wanted to add, "Oh, that reminds me of when." But she stopped herself. And you know what? The difference was immediate. Her daughter's voice sounded lighter. The pauses felt comfortable, not awkward. For the first time in a long while, their conversation felt like a real exchange, not a lecture, not a monologue, just two people truly being with each other. After they hung up, Sarah sat quietly for a moment, smiling to herself. She realized that real connection doesn't come from how much we say, it comes from how much we're willing to hear. Now, when she talks with friends, family, or even strangers at the market. She reminds herself of one simple truth. Listening is love in action. Words can fill silence, but listening fills hearts. The seventh habit that quietly builds walls: refusing help and pushing people away. There's a kind of pride that comes with a lifetime of doing things on your own. Many of us have spent decades taking care of others, raising families, running households, working hard, solving problems. So when the time comes that we start to need a little help ourselves, it can feel uncomfortable, maybe even humiliating. We tell ourselves, "I've managed this long. I don't need anyone now." That's exactly where Sarah found herself. She'd always been independent, the one people came to for advice, for a hot meal, for a hand when they needed one. But one afternoon, as she struggled to carry a heavy grocery bag from her car, a young man walking by stopped and said kindly, "Ma'am, can I help you with that?" Without missing a beat, she smiled politely and said, "Oh no, thank you. I've got it." But she didn't. The bag slipped, her back ached, and by the time she got inside, her hands were trembling. She sat down at the kitchen table, breathing hard. And for the first time in a long time, she felt it. That quiet ache of loneliness. Not because no one cared, but because she'd pushed away someone who did. It's strange how our pride can trick us. We think saying yes makes us weak, but in truth, it's the opposite. When we allow others to help, we give them the gift of feeling useful, connected, needed. Refusing help might protect our independence for a moment, but over time, it builds a wall that keeps kindness out and isolation in. That evening, as Sarah sat with a cup of tea, she thought about all the times she'd told people, "Don't worry, I can handle it," when deep down, she was exhausted. She realized she'd spent her life helping others feel cared for, but she'd never let anyone return that same care to her. And the truth is, we all need that sometimes, not because we're weak, but because we're human. So she made a small decision. The next time someone offered help, she wouldn't brush it off. She would try to simply say, "Thank you. I'd appreciate that." It happened a few days later. The same young man saw her again in the parking lot and smiled. "Need a hand today?" This time, Sarah laughed softly and said, "Actually, yes, I would." He carried the bag to her door, and as they chatted about the weather, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just about the bag. It was about letting connection back in. From then on, she started to notice the moments when people tried to reach out. The neighbor offering to mow the lawn, the friend inviting her to lunch, the daughter asking, "Do you want me to stop by?" Instead of saying no, she began to say yes. And the more she said yes, the less alone she felt. Because accepting help doesn't mean giving up your independence. It means sharing your humanity. It's saying, "I trust you enough to let you in." And that small act of openness can turn an ordinary day into something warmer, gentler, more alive. Sarah once said it best herself, "When I stopped trying to prove I didn't need anyone, I realized how many people were waiting to love me." The eighth habit that quietly steals joy: being overly frugal and avoiding enjoyment. Sarah had always been careful with money. She grew up in a time when every dollar mattered. When you learn to make do and stretch what you had, that kind of caution never really leaves you. It becomes part of who you are. She clipped coupons, compared prices, and saved for the what-ifs. There was a certain comfort in knowing her savings account was healthy, that she was prepared for whatever might come. But somewhere along the way, that sense of security turned into fear. Every time her friend Emily invited her out for lunch or a weekend trip, she hesitated. "Maybe next time," she'd say, convincing herself she was being responsible. But next time rarely came. Even small indulgences, a nice dinner, a new book, a spontaneous treat, came with a wave of guilt. What if I need that money later? What if something happens? She thought she was protecting herself, but the truth was, she was slowly cutting herself off from the very things that make life feel alive. Shared moments, laughter, connection, joy. Her world grew smaller, not because she didn't have enough, but because she was too afraid to use what she had. One day, Emily stopped by with a smile and said, "Sarah, you've worked your whole life to build this safety net. When are you going to let it hold you instead of just looking at it?" The words caught her off guard. She'd never thought of it that way, that her money wasn't supposed to just sit there. It was supposed to support her life, not control it. That night, Sarah looked around her home, comfortable, stable, and quiet, and felt something stir. She realized that saving was wise, yes, but living was wiser. What good was security if it came at the cost of experiences that made life beautiful? So she made a small decision. She started what she called her joy jar, a small envelope of money set aside each month, not for bills or emergencies, but for experiences that made her smile. A dinner out with friends, a short drive to the countryside, a little something that made her feel alive, not just safe. The first thing she did was say yes to Emily's next invitation, a simple weekend trip. The two of them laughed, shared stories, ate too much dessert, and stayed up late talking like they used to. When she came home, she felt lighter, freer, almost young again. She realized it wasn't about spending recklessly. It was about giving herself permission to enjoy what she had worked so hard to earn. Because money, after all, is not meant to be just stored. It's meant to serve life, to create memories, to build connection, to remind us that joy isn't something you wait for someday. It's something you can choose today. Sarah still saves, of course. Old habits die hard, but now she saves with purpose. She saves to live, not to hide. And every time she opens that joy jar, she smiles, remembering that the richest moments in life are rarely the ones that cost the least. They're the ones that are actually lived. The ninth habit that quietly builds distance. Talking down to younger generations. You know how it goes. We spend a lifetime learning lessons the hard way, raising families, working, figuring things out on our own. And then, one day, we look at the young ones and think, oh, they have no idea what the real world is like. We don't mean any harm by it. We think we're sharing wisdom, but sometimes, without realizing it, the way we say things ends up pushing them away. That's what happened with Sarah and her grandson, Noah. He used to stop by all the time, full of stories, laughter, and energy. He'd pull out his phone and say, "Grandma, you've got to see this." One afternoon, he was showing her some new app he loved, something about streaming and online videos. Sarah listened for a bit, smiled, and then said what many of us have probably said before. Back in my day, kids actually went outside and played real games, not just stared at screens. Noah didn't argue. He just gave a small smile and said, "Yeah, maybe," before heading back to his phone. A few minutes later, he said he had to go. And when the door closed behind him, the house felt quieter. A kind of quiet that sinks a little deeper than usual. Sarah sat there wondering what she'd done wrong. To her, it was just a comment, a simple truth from her time. But to Noah, it felt like she was putting down his world, like what he cared about didn't matter. And that's something many of us forget. When we talk down to younger people, even with the best intentions, what they often hear isn't wisdom. What they hear is, "You don't get it." That night, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about it. She missed the closeness they used to have, and she realized something. Maybe the world really has changed, and maybe she didn't have to fight that change so hard. Maybe, instead of judging, she could just be curious. So the next time Noah came over, she tried a different approach. When he mentioned his video game, instead of sighing, she smiled and said, "Tell me about it. What's so fun about that game?" Noah's whole face lit up. He started talking a mile a minute, explaining what he played, who he played with, how it made him laugh. Sarah didn't understand half of it, but she didn't need to. She saw something she hadn't seen in a while. That spark in his eyes when he felt heard. After that, their visits felt different. They didn't just talk about the old days anymore. They talked about now. He showed her funny videos. She told him about her garden. They laughed together again. Two generations meeting in the middle, not through lectures, but through listening. And that's when it hit her. Curiosity builds bridges. Judgment builds walls. Every time she asked instead of assuming, Noah opened up more. Every time she listened instead of correcting, he came a little closer. Now, whenever she catches herself about to say, "Back in my day," she smiles and thinks, that day had its beauty. And so does this one. Because real connection doesn't come from knowing better. It comes from caring enough to ask. Tell me more. The 10th habit that quietly weighs the heart, holding on to grudges and regrets. If there's one kind of weight that doesn't show on the outside but can make a person feel heavy all the same, it's the weight of old hurts. The things we keep replaying in our minds. Words that were said. Moments we wish had gone differently. People who let us down. We tell ourselves we've moved on, but deep down, some part of us still holds on. Sarah knew that feeling well. There were people she hadn't spoken to in years. A sister-in-law she'd argued with. A friend who drifted away after harsh words. Mistakes she made as a mother that still crept back into her thoughts late at night. It all sat quietly inside her, like stones in her pocket. Not heavy enough to stop her, but heavy enough to slow her down, sometimes when she was alone. Those memories came rushing back. She'd think, why did I say that? Why didn't I try harder? Why couldn't they understand me? The questions had no answers, just echoes. And the more she turned them over in her mind, the lonelier she felt. Because carrying resentment doesn't just close the door on other people, it closes the door on peace. One evening, while sorting through old papers, she found an old birthday card from that same friend she hadn't spoken to in years. The note inside simply said, "Thank you for always being there." That's when it hit her, somewhere along the way. She had let pride build a wall where friendship used to live. So she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She sat down with a notebook and started writing, not to send, not to show anyone, just to let it out. Every hurt, every apology she'd never spoken, every grudge she still carried. She wrote until the words stopped hurting. Then she tore the pages into little pieces, whispered, "I'm done carrying this," and dropped them in the trash. It might sound small, but that act, that quiet release, changed something inside her. It was like setting down a load she'd forgotten she was holding. The next morning, she woke up lighter. Not everything was fixed, of course. But she felt the kind of calm she hadn't felt in years. That's the thing about forgiveness. It's not about pretending it didn't happen or saying it was okay. It's about choosing to stop letting it own you. Forgiveness doesn't set the other person free. It sets you free. Now, when Sarah feels an old hurt bubbling up, she pauses and asks herself, is this worth carrying another day? Most of the time, the answer is no. So she lets it pass, sometimes through a prayer, sometimes through a deep breath, sometimes through a quiet, "I forgive you," even if the person will never hear it. Because life, especially in these later years, is too short to keep holding what hurts. The peace we want is already waiting. It's just on the other side of letting go. The 11th habit that quietly puts us at risk, ignoring health issues. There's a strange kind of hope that comes with denial. When something feels off, a bit of dizziness, an ache that lingers, a tiredness that won't go away, it's tempting to shrug it off and say, "I'm fine, just getting older." We tell ourselves it's nothing, that it'll pass. But deep down, we know when something isn't right. Sarah used to do that all the time. Her knees had been aching for months, but she kept saying it was just the weather. When she felt dizzy one morning, she told herself it was because she hadn't eaten enough. And when her daughter suggested seeing a doctor, Sarah waved it off. There's no need to make a fuss. Then, one afternoon, while carrying laundry up the stairs, she lost her balance. The fall wasn't serious, but it shook her. Not just her body, but her confidence. Lying there on the floor, she realized that all those little signs she'd ignored were her body's way of whispering, "Please, listen to me." She just hadn't been listening. That's the thing. Most health problems don't show up overnight. They build slowly, quietly. Just like every other habit we've talked about. And when we ignore them, what could have been a small, fixable issue can turn into something far more serious. Denial doesn't protect us, it just delays healing. After her fall, Sarah made a promise to herself. She started paying attention. She went to her doctor, got her checkups, asked questions. She started drinking more water, something so simple, but it made her feel better almost right away. She began keeping a little notebook by her bedside to jot down how she felt each day. Nothing fancy, just small notes. Slept well, back felt stiff, walked 2 blocks today. And you know what? The more she listened to her body, the more her body seemed to listen back. The dizziness faded. Her energy came back. She started to feel stronger, not because she was fighting age, but because she was working with it instead of ignoring it. Sarah realized that caring for her health wasn't about fear. It was about respect for the years she'd already lived and for the ones she still had ahead. Checking in with the doctor, eating a bit better, staying hydrated, moving gently. These weren't chores. They were quiet acts of self-love. Now, whenever she feels something off, she doesn't brush it aside. She takes a breath, drinks some water, and says, "All right, body, what are you trying to tell me today?" Because the truth is, our bodies don't betray us. They warn us. They whisper before they shout. And the sooner we listen, the longer, calmer, and more comfortable our days can be. The 12th habit that dims the spirit: forgetting to nurture joy and laughter. Somewhere along the way, life gets quieter. The routines settle in. The laughter fades a little. And we start moving through our days out of habit more than excitement. We tell ourselves it's just part of getting older. That the joy, the playfulness, the laughter, those belong to younger years. But the truth is, the heart never stops needing them. For Sarah, this realization came one evening when her friend Emily invited her over for movie night. At first, Sarah hesitated. "I'm fine," she said. "I'll just stay home tonight." But Emily wouldn't take no for an answer, so Sarah went, a little tired, a little reluctant, expecting just another quiet evening. But something happened that night, somewhere between the silly jokes, the popcorn, and an old comedy that made them both laugh until their stomachs hurt. Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: pure, simple joy. It wasn't about the movie. It was about the feeling of being light again, alive again, human again. On the way home, she caught herself smiling for no reason, and it hit her. Laughter wasn't just something nice to have. It was medicine. Medicine for the heart, the body, and the soul. It reminded her that she didn't have to earn happiness or wait for big moments to feel it. Joy could come from anywhere. A funny story, a song from her youth, a shared cup of tea with a friend. So the next morning, she decided to make joy part of her routine. The same way she made her morning coffee. She played music while making breakfast, called an old friend just to laugh about something silly, watched the birds outside her window a little longer. Tiny moments, but each one added color back to her days. And little by little, something shifted. The house didn't feel so quiet anymore. The world seemed softer, kinder. People felt drawn to her again, not because she was doing anything special, but because joy has a way of spreading. When we let ourselves feel it, it touches everyone around us. Sarah learned that joy isn't childish. It's sacred. It keeps the heart open and the spirit strong. The more she laughed, the more alive she felt, and the more connected she became to the people she loved. Now, she often says with a smile, growing older doesn't mean you stop laughing. It means you finally know why laughter matters. Because joy, even in its simplest form, is what keeps us truly alive. It's the sound of the soul remembering how to breathe. You know, Sarah's story didn't really end in loneliness. It began again in the smallest, simplest ways. Not with any big change or sudden burst of energy, just quiet choices made one day at a time. She didn't need a new life. She just needed a new way of seeing the one she already had. It started with little things, replacing a complaint with a kind word, picking up the phone instead of waiting for someone else to call, letting go of one small thing she didn't need anymore, saying yes when someone offered to help, smiling at a stranger in the grocery line. Those tiny things might sound like nothing, but that's how life starts to open back up. Each one was like cracking a window in a room that had been shut for too long. The air changed. The light came back in. Her world didn't suddenly grow bigger. She did. And little by little, the people she loved began finding their way back. The laughter returned. The warmth returned. And somewhere in that quiet shift, Sarah found something she thought she'd lost. A feeling of belonging, not just to other people, but to life itself. That's really what this whole story is about. Not perfection. Not pretending everything's easy, but remembering that change doesn't have to be big to matter. Sometimes, one small, honest step is all it takes to turn things around. So here's something gentle you can try over the next 24 hours. Pick just one thing from today's talk and do it. Start a conversation with gratitude. Say yes when someone offers a hand. Send a quick text to someone you've been meaning to reach out to. Let go of one thing you no longer need. Or simply ask a younger person about their world and really listen. Don't overthink it. Just try one. You might be surprised how even a tiny change can soften the edges of your day. Because growing older doesn't mean shrinking. It doesn't mean fading away. It means you've lived long enough to know that connection takes care. And care takes intention. And every single day, no matter how many years have passed, you're still allowed to grow. You're still allowed to begin again. So before you go, I'd really love to hear from you. Which habit hit home for you today? Was there one that made you stop and think, that sounds a little like me? Go ahead and share it in the comments. I always enjoy reading what you have to say. And if you're still here with me at this point, just comment a simple one below so I know you stayed all the way through. If this talk touched your heart, please take a second to tap that like button. It helps Elderly Heart Talks reach more people who might need these gentle reminders too. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and turn on the little bell so you won't miss our next conversation here on Elderly Heart Talks. Every week, we share real stories, soft reflections, and practical lessons to help us age with more connection, peace, and purpose. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Take good care of yourself. And remember, no matter how many years have passed, you're still allowed to grow. And you're still allowed to begin again.